Nicholas, it's great to see you again. Let's talk about what is making waves in the news. And in the last couple of days, Trump has renewed his threats to take over Greenland. And he's not ruling out military or economic measures to pursue the very strategically valuable islands. Your thoughts?
Well, I guess a big Happy New Year from the president to be in America here, right? Well, it's kind of interesting because I think that we saw these claims several years ago, and they were rebuked by Denmark, and for those who don't know, Greenland is a former Danish colony, and now Greenland is a full part of the Danish kingdom, and the Greenland citizens, all 56,000 of them, are Danish citizens. And so, there is an issue here of, this is an EU border, right? And so, in the wake of the current uncertainty, we do have saber rattling with Europe, which is something that we haven't really seen to this degree in the past. And I think that, over the last few years, really the crux of the issue here, the rhetoric with which this is delivered under was different than the actual aim, right? You have Donald Trump Jr. going to visit Greenland, and really the
Right.
underpinning issue here is national security. And it's something that I feel like has gotten lost. Most of this has been saber rattling versus actually getting to the crux of why this is an important island.
A location perspective, for military operations, it's especially important for Arctic and missile defense. And I think that, the second part of that is also critical minerals. And, it's Greenland's got deposits, something like 25 out of 34 of the minerals classified as critical raw materials by the EU are located in Greenland. So above and beyond the Arctic's increasing strategic value, Greenland is a prime target.
And I think most people don't realize too, it's actually quite interesting is, the Arctic area broadly, to your point, is becoming kind of a another theater for great power competition. Over the last, let's say 10, 15, 20 years, the while masked in very aggressive rhetoric, some of what the group is pointing out here is an issue. I think that there is the one cooperation put forth by the U.S., Canada, and Finland to counter Russia and China in the Arctic. But it's really in the early days, and I think that most people don't realize that that region has maritime significance, and as the effects of climate change, become more severe, those waterways are more and more navigable as ice melts, and very strategic. And I think that you have an interesting perspective on that, having been in Canada and seen the North and how that kind of works. And people don't really realize that there's a whole ecosystem up there that is changing pretty rapidly as this ice melts.
It's a physical change. When that ice melts, it really opens up shipping lanes, which are, become valuable from the perspective of resource extraction opportunities.
And I think that the other thing with that too, that is something that we have not addressed for quite some time, is the structure of the United States actually taking up governance and delivery of Greenland, is and this is unprecedented, right? But I think that one thing that um, will come into focus no matter what happens with this, and I think has already been highlighted, is that the Danish government is going to have to play, if they're going to keep on to Greenland, a much more focused role in Arctic security. You look at the United States, and the rest of NATO do not have the icebreaker fleet, which icebreakers are the specifically designed ships that can go into some of these areas where, as the name says, break the ice. And China and Russia have been aggressively building this fleet out and preparing for some of these matters for quite some time now. And so, as this situation heats up, everything from strategic shipping lanes to critical minerals, to defense. Our one base from a United States perspective in Greenland is a missile notification defense center, and so there's a lot of issues at play here, and it's the problem is who's best to govern this? Is it who is closest to it, who has the most cultural connection to it? There's only 56,000 people. It's really a challenging situation. There's not been, the U.S. post World War II has, this is the only place that didn't claim an empire, right, when it could have, so to say. And so there's been a bit of a moral high ground here, and Donald Trump is starting to walk that line, which puts the U.S. in a completely different, the global South, in the event the U.S. really goes for proper territorial expansion, the reverberation and the ripple effect of the act here of proper imperialism will be viewed in a very specific manner by those who have been subject to that in other parts of the world.
Yeah, I think it's so true. And a shift in ownership, while it could enhance the US's Arctic strategy, it has a huge potential to alienate their European allies, and potentially isolating the US on certain issues. In with, Denmark being part of NATO, I think it adds, additional pressure around Trump's threats.
And you really unpack the issue further. One thing that the Biden administration did a decent job of, and there's a whole question here of, depending upon the severity of the situation, how do you address this? But the collective action contains a lot of power, and I think that in the effort of the Arctic security crisis is a medium to long term threat. The critical mineral and critical material deficit facing the West is a now issue in the event any kind of conflict would be sustained. And I think that, thinking about that collective action, similarly, while Greenland can provide a certain degree of mineral security, a lot of the mineral security that is going to be provided to the U.S. through these collective partnerships and nearshoring agreements, friendshoring agreements, as they're stated, are going to be with countries who have been subject to abuse and imperialism by their former colonial powers. And if the U.S. is simultaneously seeking friendshoring relationships and embarking on forced territorial expansion, you could see a strategic shift there from some of those actors towards a China or a Russia who have historically erred on the other side of imperialism. And so there's this complex issue that really pops up that, in some way, if you look at Canada, the immediate neighbor there, he's made threats towards, there's a huge indigenous population in Canada, same thing in the US. I think the ramifications of the action are so much more severe for the US's reputation from a trading perspective than most people I think are reading into.
Right. And while, Greenland is part of Denmark and Denmark retains that control over areas like defense and foreign policy, Greenland manages its own domestic affairs, including the natural resource and exploration of those natural resources. And, this is indigenous people who, communities that are reliant on those traditional lifestyles, and it's fragile. So going in to just exploit those resources could really, impact the local economy and its people.
That's a very, very astute point there. Is that when you think about like some of the jurisdictions, it's funny, because we haven't had this in a long time. So when people think about resource heavy jurisdiction, the change from relative poverty to extreme or moderate wealth. They think about places in the Middle East, Africa, Asia, Latin America, broadly the global South. Whereas we rewind nearly 80, 100 years, this is the story of Norway. This is the story of many of these European jurisdictions who enjoy now a substantial social safety net and a very high quality of life. That this is kind of where it started, as the resource curse turned into something that benefited the people for a long period of time and create an endowment that is effectively should be self-sustaining in theory, right, if managed correctly.
Mhm.
And so, you wonder in the event that resource exploitation at scale starts to occur here, who is the ultimate beneficiary? Because even though Denmark is responsible, it's well, is the sovereign party in play here. The local 56,000 people is not. I mean, that's
A
like
lot of people.
yeah, village in the U.S. or Canada, right? So it's the question there, because there's also been you had the forced sterilizations of indigenous women in Greenland by the Danish in the 60s, and there's a lot of things that have happened that have created animosity there, and so you wonder to a certain degree, who is ultimately going to be the beneficiary of this activity.
Yeah, no, most definitely. And when we think through who all the players are above and beyond, people in Greenland, the U.S. is currently so reliant on other countries for critical minerals, including China. And China has already and Russia have already expressed interest in the region. And if the United States were able to acquire or take control of Greenland and its resources, it would certainly reduce that reliance on imports from China.
And I think that the other challenge with that too, that could be interesting is there is between the U.S., Canada, and the broader natural resource industries, there is quite a bit of know-how and experience putting infrastructure in remote areas to the engage in natural resource extraction business. And it's interesting. I know there's been a lot of proposals for activities such as this in Greenland that has not come to fruition. And I wonder, if you take the other side of this, not to criticize the Danish government, because I'm sure that they're doing what they're going about their business here. But the to a certain degree, if you're dealing with look at Canada, for example, and look at the U.S., all of the areas where there is remote exploitation of natural resources, there's reasonable support from the government to build the appropriate infrastructure
Yeah.
and get people in place to actually do the work and sustain local ecosystems for this to be sustainable over the long haul, right? And so, I think that is something that in the whether it's doesn't have to be a takeover, right? Like saying like we're going to buy this, we're going to do. If you look in history, both Truman and and Jimmy Carter tried to buy. I think it was well. I may have that incorrect. There's been two presidents that tried to buy Greenland in the past. Um,
Mhm.
you wonder if the U.S. wouldn't be better placed to a certain degree to actually stimulate economic growth there.
Right. Yeah. Maybe a strategic alliance might be a better route to take. I guess we'll see. I think certainly the announcement, could be dismissed as far-fetched or symbolic, but it keeps hitting the headlines. So I guess we'll wait and see what the repercussions look like ahead.
Yeah, and it's funny. I was just on my LinkedIn earlier, and I was seeing like people in the national security realm traveling to Greenland. So I think it's actually, more. I think it's a bit more serious than people let on. I think that the challenge, and Canada's dealt with this for a long time, is that like this is, and we're dealing with frigid conditions.
Hmm.
And we already have kind of a worker crisis in most areas of the West. So you wonder to what that I'm really curious to see, like in the event that there is some kind of what I think will end up happening is the security issue will come to the forefront, and there'll be a multi-party coalition that forms to deal with Arctic security and critical minerals
Right.
simultaneously. But the the people issue, because a lot of policymakers, similar to Wall Street, like those, okay, look like it's a great idea to get critical minerals from like Greenland or northern Canada. That sounds great, but like when it's negative 40 Fahrenheit, um,
Yeah.
the actual like there's this tendency to assume that if we can pay for it, the people will show up and do it, and it's going to be okay. And that's totally not the case, right?
Not that practical. And it's remote. But I think again, as you point out, it really reflects that deeper strategic concern over both the Arctic and global resources.
Yeah, and at a time where you've got like it's very interesting because there's this issue going on simultaneously of Russian aggression, and then the U.S. China circumstances deteriorating relatively rapidly, and a lot of uncertainty with Trump coming into office, and you wonder to what degree. Just look at, if just taking the critical mineral shortage here with China, for example, the the degree for the U.S. to sustain a conflict is really predicated on having continued access to raw materials from China. We've lost that entire ecosystem, and I
Yeah.
think that like the information that we're probably not privy to is if we were to get into a conflict, maybe these minerals from Greenland are this swing resource that if exploited rapidly would allow us to start to build back a raw material um, ecosystem, because that's not present today and is hugely important in the event. You just look at like World War One. One of the biggest near failures of the British military was they fired more shells in 3 weeks than they did the entire Boer War, and just completely unprepared for the level of raw material consumption and just general finished
Yeah.
goods consumption coming from conflict.
It's will be interesting to follow the ripple effect on this.